Hey there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. It's Superfly Comics Guy, back finally to bring you a review of The Flash by Geoff Johns Omnibus Volume 1. We'll be taking a look at the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through where I can share some of my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on this book. So if you enjoy the video at any point, you know how to show it, and feel free to speed down in the comments below and leave your own thoughts. But with that out of the way, let's start diving into what is known as one of the best runs of the fastest man alive. Well, one of the fastest men alive. There's a few of them. It gets a little complicated, but don't worry, let's go. Okay, so here we have the dust jacket to this omnibus, featuring a issue cover done by Brian Bolland, who actually does a lot of the issue covers in here, which is pretty cool. This is the only cover available, though. There's no variant covers for this omnibus. Although there is actually an older edition of this omnibus that's a little bit skinnier, but then they re-released it as this bigger volume with more content in it. So this is the latest and greatest edition of this book. Here we have the spine. Got a nice image of Wally there. And the back, Wally West, the fastest man alive. So we're collecting The Flash 164 through 191, The Flash Our Worlds at War #1, The Flash Iron Heights #1, The Flash Secret Files and Origins #3, and DC First Flash and Superman #1. So cover price of this omnibus is $100 US, $131 Canadian. Printed and bound in Canada. Hey, let's go. Let's have a look under this dust jacket here. And there we go. So we've got the board design here. You know that feeling when you're like about to sneeze, but it just won't come out? Yeah, Flash can relate. Let me open this up for you, because it is a wraparound cover. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like that cover. I just think the face he's making is a little bit goofy, but still pretty nice. But all right, let's start diving into the contents itself. Okay guys, so you know the drill by now. I'm going to be showing you through this book while doing my best to avoid spoilers, just giving you sort of the general idea of some of the types of stories you'll be getting in here and my thoughts. We got a table of contents here, which is very nice to see because this book actually does have the occasional page numbers in it, so the table of contents actually serves a purpose. Wow, imagine that. Good job, DC. But yeah, I feel like I've been gone for a while. Life has gotten a little busy lately, and I feel like we'll continue to be for a while. So it may take me a while to put out videos, but I do hope you guys will still be there when I do put out these videos, because I just enjoy so much talking about these books with you guys. But yeah, let's dive into this. So we're dealing with Wally West here, the Flash. Actually the third Flash, also struck by lightning and became the fastest man alive. But it's not just about speed. He's got a lot of cool powers. So speed is one of them, but you know, it's how he uses that speed is pretty interesting too, whether it's time dilation or matter manipulation. I've always found that Flash is such an interesting character, and the types of stories you get are pretty fun if you're like a physics nerd. I've always been a fan of physics, so you know, you get stuff like time and space manipulation, nerdy gravity stuff, and black holes. They like to poke around with science a little bit in Flash stories. And I always liked the Flash because of that. I never knew that much about him though. But for example, I grew up watching a bunch of the Justice League animated shows, and I always thought he was super cool in those. You know, recently, my brother has been getting me into watching the Flash CW show, which has been an interesting experience so far. But it's been alright, and that sort of spurred my curiosity to try out this book here. So yeah, we're starting off here with a bit of an opening, an Alice in Wonderland type story, where Flash finds himself kind of in an alternate reality, which is interesting, and it's an interesting choice because this does a good job to sort of catch you up to speed, no pun intended, on Flash's history, because it being this alternate reality type story, Flash is like, oh, well, this isn't how these things normally are. This is how things normally are. And then it gives you sort of an avenue to explain to the reader a little bit about the Flash. Free exposition, right? I gotta say, though, wasn't really digging this art style at the beginning here. By Angel Unsueta, I believe is the name of the artist. Just a lot of weird looking faces. Flash would often be drawn with this absurd looking chin. It wasn't really my vibe, I gotta be honest. And then the next arc you get in here kind of involves a bit of a mystery because someone is targeting people that have been saved by the Flash before. And Flash has to figure out what the heck is going on. You can see the art style has changed. Now we're looking at Scott Collins' art. And I thought this was a little better compared to the previous art style, but I found that something was still bothering me. And it took me a long time to notice, but once I did, it blew my mind. There's almost no shadows in this art. Barely any inking, at least from what I can tell. And once I noticed that, it kind of made it difficult for me to focus. Because it started to have a similar problem as that Spider-Gwen omnibus that I reviewed, where the art just seemed very, very flat, very little depth. The perspective can get a little bit confusing sometimes. There's this sort of blue hue that is kind of present in a lot of these images a lot of the time. And yeah, I wasn't really feeling this art style overall either, but I guess it was a little better than the previous one. Now, sometimes you'll get guest artists like Ethan Van Sciver, and those issues I really, really loved the art, but otherwise, you're basically picking between exaggerated faces and weird proportions, or this sort of flat monotone art for most of the omnibus. I will say, though, it definitely takes a certain level of skill to effectively draw Flash, this super dynamic, super fast character, on a static page, to convey that level of speed. Because like in a show or a movie or a video game, you can really easily depict him sort of zipping around everywhere. But on a page, that's a lot harder to do, and I think they do that really well here, showing just how fast Flash really is. And as I said, a lot of the covers are done by Brian Boland, which is really cool to see too. But honestly, what you're here for is definitely the writing, I would say anyway. This series will do a pretty great job of setting up the supporting cast and also introducing you to Flash's various villains. People like Mirror Master, Weather Wizard, Black Racer, The Thinker, this group known as the Rogues. That group actually ends up causing a lot of problems in this omnibus. Captain Cold. Now, I'm not saying these are the most interesting comic book villains out there, but hey, they get the job done for this story. Speaking of Captain Cold, though, there is an issue in here that kind of goes into his backstory, his origin, his childhood, and that, I gotta say, that must be one of the highlight issues in this whole book, because it takes this seemingly cut and dry, pretty one-note seeming character and reveals a pretty tragic background, that there's a whole lot more going on under the surface, and I just like that. I like when villains are given personality like that, when you can get a feel for why they do the things that they do. So yeah, the writing here I would say is pretty good, but I will say I don't think that this is a series that you should binge read, because this took me a decently long time to finish, at least for my standards. I found it pretty slow to read, which is pretty ironic when you're talking about The Flash. But I'll be honest, this doesn't really feel like a 2000s series to me, which is when it was coming out. But rather, it feels more like a Bronze Age series, actually. A lot of these issues are pretty self-contained, with some occasional longer arcs here and there. but I wouldn't say it feels like one long continuous story all throughout this omnibus. You could honestly jump into pretty much any issue in this book and generally be able to follow along. So I think if you're a fan of, that style of storytelling, that sort of Bronze Age material, I think you'll probably enjoy this book. Now, as for the extras section, well, I gotta be honest, guys, this book doesn't really have one. You get some snippets here telling you a little bit about the first appearances of some characters, but that's really it. Tar Pit, Goldface, Captain Cold, but yeah, you don't really get too much extra material, or really any, to be honest. As for the build quality, though, you have 838 pages in this omnibus. There you can see what that eye looks like, which is pretty good for a DC omnibus. So this is how it lays over. My printing's not too bad. There is still some gutter loss, which gets in the way. That eye is big, but the binding is still pretty tight, so you will lose some artwork every now and then. There's another page later on in the book where that sort of splits Flash's face in two across the page, and the gutter loss makes that look kind of funny. But the page quality is pretty good. Sometimes you will see bleed through if there's a lot of white on the page, but honestly it's very minor. The page quality is quite good. The biggest problem, I think, is probably the binding and how it lays over, because when you get closer to the beginning here, there will be points where the book kind of tries to raise up and shut itself, but it's definitely not the worst I've seen. But that brings us to the end here, so in conclusion, I will say that I did like this omnibus, but I didn't love it. The writing is definitely the focus here. Wally is a really endearing character, love him. The villains are introduced pretty well, but I think you'll have to take your time with this book because it can move pretty slowly at times. Definitely slower than something like Geoff Johns' Aquaman, for example. And I did find my immersion being broken pretty frequently by the art. If you're completely new to comics, I'm not sure this would be the best book out there to start with, but if you're somewhat familiar with comics and you have an interest in learning more about the Flash specifically, then I would say this seems like a good place to start. For people that have read volumes 2 and 3 of this series, I'd actually be curious to hear from you and your opinion. How do you think volume 2 and 3 compare to this one? Does it get better? Does it get worse? Is it slower, faster? What do you think? I don't know. If you know more about this series, let me know down below. But that's been my review of The Flash by Geoff Johns Omnibus Volume 1. Let me know what you thought about the book, the review, the series, like I said. Leave your thoughts down below. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope to see you in another video real soon. So you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.